3rd birthday this week. It's wonderful to see everyone. My daughter Maital was born in 1983 in Israel. Her name means dewdrops. And when we came to the United States, we moved to Jacksonville in 1991 and then to Greensboro in 1995, where we've lived for the past 25 years. Maital is a graduate of Grimsley High School. She was the senior class president. She went to Duke on a full scholarship as a Robertson Scholar. She's also been a movie maker. She made a movie about kids that were taking off a year before going into the Israeli army, a movie called Mechina that we estimate was seen by close to 100,000 people in a variety of settings and Jewish film festivals throughout the country. She then, after that particular period, she went to the Kenan-Flagler School of Business on a full scholarship at the University of North Carolina, and then went to work for McKinsey Consulting, which is the largest consulting organization in the world. She is the North American Director of Diversity and Inclusion. She lives in Atlanta with her wife. She has this wonderful 3-year-old boy, Noam, and is 7 months pregnant with another little boy on the way, and Nancy and I are overjoyed about that. Parenting a young person who is gay was a challenge for my wife and I, but it was one that hopefully we did without too much damage, although Maital may tell us more about that tonight. But I think that you should know that I am so incredibly proud of my daughter, of our daughter. She is an amazingly accomplished woman. And I think that June being Pride Month and this particular Shabbat being the 5th anniversary of the Supreme Court ruling, which made laws such as Amendment 1 here in North Carolina, which forbidded same-sex couples to get married and be legally recognized by the state. I couldn't imagine a better time to have a Pride Shabbat, and I couldn't imagine a better speaker than this young woman who is really so accomplished and so incredible. So, Maital, if you're ready, I'm passing it on to you.
Thanks, Abba. We should all be introduced by our fathers. I think I'll have to bring him on all of my Zoom calls to introduce me. Thank you, Abba. I appreciate that. Shabbat Shalom to everybody. I'm really humbled and honored to speak on this Pride Shabbat. Oh, hold on, I have to let in Stephen Mark. Oh no, Rabbi Corin, I think you'll do that. You know, I stand or sit here in front of the community. Maybe the things that my dad left out is that I've been at Temple, you know, since we moved to Greensboro. I've been a Temple member when I was 12, had my bat mitzvah there. And so it's really quite humbling to be in front of the community that has seen me grow up. And I do feel a lot of pride. But one of the things I wanted to talk about today is that process of coming out and of feeling pride of who I am today was a journey, just much like anything else. My pride journey doesn't start with pride at all, but rather a lot of fear and shame. When I was 14 and for a year and a half, I was in a secret relationship with my best friend, who was a girl. Only our other two friends knew. And at the time, I didn't have a concept that, oh, I'm gay, but rather I'm in love with Julia. And while that feels right, it also felt wrong from the cues I was getting from society. I remember wishing and praying that no one else would ever find out, because I knew it would mean that we wouldn't be able to continue seeing each other and that it would break my heart. And unfortunately, it's exactly what happened. Even though my parents and the community are liberal. And I think about actually those times, for those of you who might remember, it was when Temple was putting on the play Falsettos, which is about a family learning to deal with a father who comes out as gay. The year his son, who was played by my younger brother Yoav, was getting ready for his bar mitzvah. And shout out to Karen and to Mitchell, who are, I think, on this Zoom call and started in falsettos. Even though I was getting those cues from Temple, and even though my parents had gay and lesbian friends, there was something different about it being their own 15-year-old daughter in the mid-90s. Julia and I did break up when they found out, and I lived with a lot of shame for the rest of my teenage years. It took me 6 years until college to come out again, but on my own terms. This time to my parents, my brothers, my friends, really anybody. And today, more than 20 years after wishing no one would find out, I find myself in a completely different situation. I went through my own coming out journey. My parents certainly did, as I think many parents do. And as I look back, I think they had to come to terms with me being different than what they had imagined, and that they had found avenues, each in their own way, to move beyond that. For my dad, not surprisingly, it was through social justice and advocating for LGBTQ equality. For my mom, also not surprisingly, it was the realization that this was who I was and that our relationship was the most important thing to her, more than what they may have initially felt about it being disappointing or it being hard that I was gay. It's also not lost on me that just as I needed allies to help me on my journey, sometimes the allies that I had were more accepting of myself than I was, certainly when I was younger. That my parents too benefited from allies, and specifically so many of you at Temple. We all went on a journey to be more inclusive together, and I thank you for making sure that Temple was a place where I and my parents felt like this was a community that truly wanted to support LGBTQ people, even before there were too many of us who were out. Today, I really can't think of any more supportive parents than I have. And let me just pause and turn to them to make sure that they really hear that, because I also think it's hard. It's easy to tell my own story. You know, it is vulnerable for them to, for me to tell some of their story too. So I really can't think of any more supportive parents. And as many of you know, my dad married Netta and I in DC and in Israel. We're physically living here at Rollingwood Drive so that my parents can help Netta and me with our 3-year-old son, Noam, especially as I'm in my last months of pregnancy. I learned to forgive my parents and also recognize that we're all on this journey. Like our people's 40 years of wandering in the desert until we reached the promised land of freedom, it took my family some wandering around as a unit, as individuals, to go through Mitzrayim, literally the narrow place, to come out on the other side into the metaphorical land of freedom and pride. Going through that journey has brought me to where I am today and has made me a better person. It's also what has driven me professionally, where I work at one of the largest consulting firms and lead their North America diversity and inclusion strategy. I think for many parents, and certainly for my parents initially in the 90s, there was some part of sadness and fear that my life would be harder, that society wouldn't accept me, that it would be harder for me to be a professional or to have a family, and that I wouldn't live the vision of the life that they had wanted or hoped. And to me, what's been amazing is that in only 2 decades, to think about how far we have come as a society and how accepting we've become. Today, I'm married with a toddler, a baby on the way, we have a golden doodle. It's like almost boring, actually. We're almost very mainstream. And what's been particularly amazing is to see how much being LGBTQ has actually been celebrated in my life. When I graduated business school, the top private sector companies hire and compete for who can be the most inclusive, recognizing domestic partnerships and same-sex relationships, having equitable health benefits, sharing publicly that they're supportive of LGBTQ people. These are things that are considered now table stakes or just must-haves. When I was an intern at McKinsey, I remember the office said to me, well, we want you and Netta to know that You're fully welcome and celebrated here, and we want to make sure you're making a decision as a family. So they paid for Netta to fly over from Israel, where she was living, to Atlanta so she could get to know McKinsey too. I've worked there for 7 years and have seen the firm be more supportive and accepting than our own government. And it's not just words. They invest millions of dollars in research and activities and conferences internally for our LGBTQ colleagues and in helping to develop more LGBTQ CEOs globally. One of the things I'm especially proud of was starting what's called the Alliance, where we looked around and we saw there are only 4 openly gay CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and realized that at the top of corporate America, being one of the few LGBTQ people can be quite lonely. So in response, we at McKinsey started a network of senior executives outside of our company to create space for people to connect, to learn, and develop the next cadre of leaders. This week, in honor of Pride Week, I'm especially proud that we have published and that I've been able to co-author 2 pieces of research. One on what drives inclusion in companies, and the second on the experience of LGBTQ plus people in the workplace. So we surveyed 2,000 people globally and learned a few really interesting things, at least I think it's interesting. First, there's never been a time, at least in the US, where being LGBTQ has been so celebrated in the public and private sphere. If you looked at LinkedIn this week, most of the large companies have changed their logos to be Rainbow Pride to show their support, including McKinsey. And we see LGBTQ representation in media, in film, in music, and so many of us have LGBTQ people in our own families. Still, there's a lack of representation, especially for LGBTQ women, who make up about 5% of the population, 2.3% of entry-level workers, and only 0.6% of senior VPs and above. There are still unique challenges in the workplace for LGBTQ employees, including feeling isolation, outright discrimination, microaggressions, which are the daily experiences of bias that women, people of color, and LGBTQ people are more likely to experience. Things like having to correct people's assumptions about your life, or feeling like you don't get credit for your ideas, being mistaken for somebody more junior, or hearing derogatory remarks or jokes about people like you. These are all things that can add up to make you feel like you don't belong. And we found that people are still not out in the workplace. 1 in 4 of our respondents are not out, and this is especially true for younger tenured colleagues and for women. For those who are out, it's not oh, I'm out and that's done. It's a one-time thing, or it's a state of being. But rather, we found that nearly half of our people said that they come out at work on a daily or a weekly basis, that people are constantly coming out. And those experiences aren't always positive, with 37% of people saying that coming out at least once in the past month was uncomfortable. Sitting in the diversity inclusion world, we often get asked why this matters. Our research shows that the more diversity companies have at the top, the more likely they are to outperform other companies financially. In other words, diversity actually helps your bottom line. So diversity of people brings diversity of experiences, ideas, perspectives, and it also helps companies win the war for talent. In our research, we asked people whether they would turn down a job or a company if they felt like it wasn't an inclusive place to work. Half of our LGBTQ respondents said yes, they wouldn't pursue a job. And what was even more surprising to me was that 40% of everyone, all respondents, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, said that they would not take a job if they felt that the company wasn't an inclusive place to work. Diversity and representation is incredibly important, but it's not enough. Companies and organizations need to create environments where people can be authentically themselves and be valued as such. When we can be our authentic selves, we can live without fear, without the noise in our head wondering if we can succeed even though we're different. It's actually a very Jewish concept, the idea that we're all created in the image of God, that we're all unique, and yet are all equal in our humanity. We all have different gifts to give, and when we can share those gifts without shame, but with pride, we not only benefit as individuals, but we benefit when we create community. We create benefit for our organizations, and we create benefit for a world that thrives. Today, as our country faces unprecedented challenges of the coronavirus pandemic, of racial inequity, the ability for us to support one another as allies and advocates takes on greater agency. As an LGBTQ person, I've gained tremendously from places like Temple and my workplace, from my family and friends being there for me. And it's something I never take for granted, and particularly speaking to a group of, in a religious institution, that causes a lot of pain for a lot of people. I couldn't be more grateful that Temple has been so proactive about being inclusive for me and for others. It's still not easy for others in my community, particularly for transgender people and queer people of color. And as a white woman, I know this is an incredibly pivotal moment in our country for me to show up for our Black brothers and sisters. As MLK Jr. so aptly said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The LGBTQ community has come far, and of course has more to go. But it's come so far from where we were when I was a scared 14-year-old. I'm grateful to be part of a Jewish community that lives its values of Tikkun Olam, recognizing that the world is broken and is up to us together to make it and one another more whole. I felt this in my life as part of this Temple Emmanuel community, and I'm so grateful and so proud to be a part of it. Thank you, and Shabbat Shalom. Over to you, Rabbi.
Thanks a lot, Maital. Thank you so much. And I think that what we're going to see over the course of the next moment or two is just people sharing their appreciation for you, Maital, and we're so grateful for your words this evening as we mark Pride Shabbat and as we are together at this very, very holy time. And we're so grateful for all that you shared with us this evening. We know that